Good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Silverberg. I'm with the Jewish War Veterans Post 697 in the Langhorne area. This is basically part two of a three-part series that your church is presenting. And I want to thank again Mr. Christensen and also your tech guru, Mr. Meno, for helping put this together. Shortly, I'm going to asking Danny to give his presentation. But first, I'd like to let you know a little quote. Last week, basically, was Holocaust Remembrance Day and week. We remember not only those poor souls that were brutally murdered, but also those survivors who suffered with physical, mental, and emotional scars. Generations will forever be impacted. During the Holocaust, about 1.5% of the people helped the Jews survive. Luckily, Danny was one of those people. So if 1.5% did help, means 98.5% of people did not help at all whatsoever. So it's important that we are not bystanders, that we're outstanders, and we do everything possible to help everyone else be as part of society and part of life. Giving you we always talk about 6 million Jews, which we were basically murdered. It's a hard number to basically comprehend, but think of it this way. City of Philadelphia has about, in the areas, has about 1.5 million population. Take 4 Philadelphias and kill everybody there. That's what 6 million basically is. So I'd like to now have Danny start his presentation. Danny?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So today I'm going to tell you the story of my family. It's my father, my mother, my sister, and myself during the Holocaust. It's a very short version that covers the period of 1939 through 1945. First, let me give you some background information. We lived in Belgium, and this is a map of Europe. By the way, everything that you see in red are all the countries that the Germans conquered in Europe during World War II. And we lived in Belgium, which is just north of France. And at the time of World War II, Belgium had approximately 65,000 Jewish people living there. And we lived in the city of Antwerp. My parents, next, were Ruchel and Chaim Goldsmith. So my name used to be Goldschmidt until I became an American citizen, and I changed it to Goldsmith. They came originally from Poland. They met in Antwerp in 1929 and decided to get married and stay there in 1930. My parents were middle-class people. My father was a plumber, and he had his own business, and my mother was a homemaker. And then 1 year later, I was born. Next. That's a picture of me. I was born on December 11th, 1931, which makes me 90 years young. And I remember a normal early childhood. And then in 1938, my parents sent me to kindergarten in an all-day Hebrew school. Next. That's a picture taken of my father, my mother, and myself when I was a couple of years old. And next, let's see, one of the entrances to the Hebrew school. Unfortunately, I could not get into the school. So here are some pictures. Next, it's a kindergarten picture. And I am standing in the middle row, second one from the right, between the two girls. That's me right there. But because it was a religious school, boys and girls were together only in kindergarten. So next picture, this is my first grade picture. You can see it's all boys, and I am the second one in the front row, the second one from the right. And then very shortly after this picture was taken, my sister Lillian was born. She was born on December 26, 1939. And when she was born, World War II had already started. She was born 3 months after the war started, so it was a very happy moment in a bleak world. So now to my story. At this point, I'm 8 years old. And by the way, that's a picture of my sister and I. The very last picture that was taken in 1942 before things got very bad. Belgium was invaded by Germany on May 10th, 1940, and our family fled on foot with thousands of other people from Belgium towards northern France. But we never made it because the Germans caught up with us very quickly and made everybody turn around and go back wherever they came from. And so we did go back to Antwerp, where my parents tried to reestablish a normal life. But it lasted only a very short time because very soon the anti-Jewish restrictions and regulations and decrees were issued. And here are only some of them in chronological order. October 28, 1940, Jewish people had to register with the Germans and were eliminated from the public and administration and legal professions and teaching professions. By the way, what you're looking at is October 28, 1940, but it's a notice in French, by the way, which tells you that the Jews have to register. August 29, 1941, a curfew was set for Jews only, thereby restricting freedom of movement. And I just want to make a point here that just because we were Jewish, we could no longer enter public places. We could not go to a park. We could not go to a museum. We could not go to a library. Any public place we could no longer enter. November 25, 1941, all Jewish children were expelled from public schools. March 11th, 1942, the Nazis imposed a special forced labor on the Jews in Belgium. And the last edict came on May 27th, 1942, when all Jews had to wear a yellow star. And so in August 1942, my father received a notice in the mail to go to a forced labor camp. Now go back to the yellow star. That's the star that was actually that the Jews wore in Germany because it's in German, but that's what we have to wear, a yellow star. So when my father received a notice in the mail to go to a labor camp in northern France, he was discussing it with my mother, and it turns out that his view prevailed. He was young, he was in very good health, and he felt he could survive a labor camp. But what my mother and my father did not know at that particular time were two things. One was called the initiation of the final solution, which was the total destruction of the Jewish population in Europe. They didn't know about that. And they did not know at that time about the existence of the concentration camps. So on August 15th, 1942, we went to this huge train station to say goodbye to my father. And I'll never forget the partying scene. There were thousands of people there saying goodbye to the loved ones, a lot of hugging, kissing, crying. But most of all, what I remember were the words that my father said to me, which were, "You are the little man in the house now, and so you'll have to help take care of your mother and your sister until I come back." And I told him I would. Basically, as far as I'm concerned, was the day that I lost my childhood, and I was only 10 years old. A little later, we received a postcard from him. Next. You can see it's addressed to 34th Kortekiewicz, which is where we lived. In the center is a German cancellation stamp, and in the upper right corner is a French cancellation stamp, which says Pas de Calais. And in the back of the postcard, my father writes in Flemish that he's near Boulogne, which was indeed right next to Pas de Calais. So my father was in France. And then in September 1942, the street that we lived on next was raided by the Nazis. And this is a picture that I took of my house 40 years later. You can see all houses are attached. By the way, number 34 was closer to the center of the street. And the house that we lived in is where the arrow is. It's the 2 windows wide, 3 stories high house. So let me explain the raid to you. What the Nazis did was to come in the middle of the night when everybody was sleeping, sealed off the street with trucks from both ends, and then started pulling out the Jewish people from their houses. I just want to remind you that it was very easy for them because remember, we had registered. They knew exactly where we lived. And when they started pulling out people from their homes, there was a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, a lot of commotion. And that actually woke my mother up. And she looked outside her bedroom window, which was the front window on the 2nd floor. And she saw what was happening and also realized what was happening. So she quickly grabbed my baby sister, myself, a blanket. And we went up to the top floor of the house, all the way to the rear of the house, where there was a metal ladder that was attached to the wall, leading up to a skylight onto the roof. And it was a flat roof, by the way. And we walked all the way from the rear of the house to the front of the house, and we laid down underneath that overhang that you see there, which used to be on my house, by the way. It's called a cornice. It used to be there. And we lay down in front of it, and my mother covered us up with a blanket. And we lay there. I remember shivering because I didn't know what was going to happen to us. A little later, we heard our door being broken down. A lot of commotion inside. It turns out that the Nazis trashed the inside of the house, but they didn't find us. However, one German soldier did go up that ladder, opened up the skylight, poked his head through, and it was dark that night, so he had a flashlight, and he looked around. But because it was at the rear of the house, and we were in the front of the house under the blanket, it's about 35, 40 feet away, he did not see us. So he went back down. We heard more banging. Turns out the Nazis boarded up the front of the house. And we laid on the roof until my mother was absolutely sure that the raid was over. And when we went back inside, my mother started crying because the house had been completely trashed. And she cried for a while, and then she finally collected herself and told me that she was going to see one of our non-Jewish friends. We had a lot of non-Jewish friends living on our street, to see if he could help us. So he was a member of the Belgian Underground, which was, part of the Belgian resistance movement. But she couldn't go out in the front, so she went through the rear. We had a little backyard, butted up against the train tracks, and on the other side was the street. Came back, told me that she had made arrangements to hide my sister and I in a Catholic convent. So the next night at the appointed time, my mother smuggled us out to the rear of the house, but this time there was a car waiting for us, and the car took us out of town, and my mother dropped us off at the convent. Incidentally, only Mother Superior knew who we were, no one else. So now I'm going to tell you something special about my mother. My mother, like many, many Holocaust survivors, could not talk about the Holocaust. It was very emotional for her. And I kept pestering her with questions. To make a long story short, it took me a long time, I'm talking about years, to find out a little piece here and a little piece there, to be able to put a story together. And one of the things that I found out many, many years later was that my mother, after she dropped us off at the convent, went back to Antwerp, and she joined the Belgium underground, and she became a messenger, a courier. So we stayed at the convent until the end of December 1942, when suddenly my mother shows up to take us out. So apparently she had found out from the underground that the convent was going to be raided. So she came down immediately to pick us up. Not only that, she also warned Mother Superior that if she was hiding any other Jewish people there, to move them out. Because at that particular time, the edict was that if you were caught hiding Jews, you'd be shot immediately. And so my mother dropped us off at another member of the underground until she could find a place to hide us, but she decided to split us up. Next. My sister, she is the second one from the right. She went to live with a private Catholic family. The cover story was that she was there, a distant member of the family that came to live with them temporarily during the war. And you can see she blended in quite well. I, on the other hand, my mother sent me to a Catholic boys' orphanage. Next. And that's a picture I took of the orphanage 40 years later, after I went back to visit Belgium. It's in a village called Weelde, which is right on the border between Belgium and Holland in the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium. And next picture shows you Father Ivor Cornelissen. He's to the left of the picture. He's the one that ran several orphanages, including this one. And he took wonderful, wonderful care of me. First thing he did when I got there is he changed my name. And my name became Willie Peters. The second thing that he did is he gave me false baptismal papers. So if anybody would question me, I would have a document to show that I was Catholic. And indeed, outwardly, I was Catholic. I went to church every day, and I also went to parochial school every day. But Father Cornelissen, after a few months, felt it was too dangerous for me to stay in one place too long, so he transferred me to another orphanage, where I continued going to do the same things, go to church, and go to school. But in May 1944, we got raided by the Nazis, and I was caught. Not only was I caught, that's when I found out there were 5 other Jewish boys there. Apparently, we kept it all very secret from each other. So they took us to prison, they questioned us, they wanted to know whether there were more people in hiding, which we didn't know. I was transferred to another prison where suddenly they, in the middle of the night, they gathered a bunch of Jewish children and put us on a freight train. Next. That's what a freight train looks like. It's a plain wooden box car that carries freight or animals. And as soon as they put us on that train, the oldest boy, Joseph, he became our leader and he urged us to escape. We didn't know how to escape, but apparently he had a plan in his head. Let me explain Joseph to you. Joseph was the oldest child there. He was 16 years old. Very tall for his age. He's the only one that wore long pants. The rest of us wore short pants. And underneath his pants, he had a pair of boots, and in one of the boots, he had piece of steel about a foot long, which basically he had in his possession to use as a weapon to protect himself. But instead, what he did was, while the train was moving, he started at the floor of the train and went up 3 wooden slats and made an opening and broke them apart and made an opening large enough for himself, because he was the tallest one there. And then he told us if the train stops or slows down, he says, I'm going to push you out one by one, and the only thing I can advise you is to roll away from the tracks when you jump out. So later on, the train never stopped, but did slow down enough at a very sharp bend. He said, that's it. And he pushed us out of the train, and all of us escaped. When the train was gone, we had to do a couple of things. First of all, we had to find everybody. It was still dark, so we had to find everybody, which we did. And then we had to check everybody to see if there were any broken bones, which there weren't any. We were very lucky. We only had bleeding cuts and sprains. And by the time that we had finished those 2 things, dawn was breaking. We looked out in the distance and we saw woods, and we went and we hid in the woods. We started talking and realized that we didn't know where we were. So Joseph said, he says, I'm going to go out at night, and because you could not be seen, I'll try to find out where we are. He came back the following night and he said that he thought that we were still in Belgium because they'd seen a sign of a village called Perway, which sounds French-like. That was very good news. But then after a little while, things got pretty bad. We had no water. We had no food. The cuts were starting to get infected, and the sprains were getting worse. So again, we're looking to Joseph for leadership. And eventually he makes a decision to go back into the village of Perway, go to the rectory next to the Catholic Church, speak to the priest, and tell him about us. And the priest apparently was very receptive. He came up with a very secret plan where he placed each one of us with a private Catholic family. And by the way, each family thought they had the only Jewish child. So next, this is the house that I was hidden in at 13 Rue de l'Église in Perway. Next. These are the people that hid me. Monsieur Bautier, Madame Bautier, very, very devout Catholic people, and also wonderful human beings. Their daughter Fernande and their other daughter Madeleine. And they hid me upstairs in their attic. Next. That's a picture that I took of the attic when I went back to Belgium 40 years later. Still totally unfinished, exactly the way I remembered it. Only the window had been replaced, that's all. I had to be absolutely quiet. And the only time that they would let me out was at night. Next. This is the backyard. You can see it's surrounded by a wall. So they would let me out at night to get some fresh air. And also, they were very nice to me. They bought me a pet rabbit so I have someone to play with. So back to my mother. Again, this is information I found out many, many years later. I did not know that my mother had kept track of me while I was in hiding. And she had found out that I had been caught. She wanted to know where I was. So she was going to see another member of the Belgium Underground. His name was Father Joseph André, to see if he could help. Part of the reason, besides he belonged to the Belgium Underground, he also was very close, let's put it that way, with the Germans. So he was able to get quite a bit of information. She thought maybe he might be able to help find out where I was. So she made an appointment to see him. And unfortunately for my mother, her timing was awful. The day she arrived in Namur was also the day the Allies bombed the city, and my mother was caught in the air raid, and my mother completely lost her left leg. I'm talking about it's completely severed from her. She lay there bleeding in the rubble, but fortunately, people found her and took her to a hospital in Namur. Now back to me. I had been with the Bautier family for quite a few months when in the fall of 1944, we were liberated by American soldiers. That's the liberation picture, only one that I have. Take a close look, you'll see an American soldier in uniform there. He's sitting on top of a Jeep, and he's surrounded by people from Paraguay. And as soon as we were liberated, the Bautier family started looking for my mother. And it is with the help of the Belgian Red Cross that they found my mother in the hospital in Namur, and they reunited me with my mother, which was a fabulous, fabulous moment, because here, my mother was alive, even though she was very sick. I was alive, my sister was alive. As far as we were concerned, all we had to do was to wait for the war to end in Europe, my father to come back, and so we could be a family again. Great, great moment. But my mother couldn't take care of me. So she, the Bautier family took me back for a little while until an American organization came into Europe called the Joint Distribution Committee, that pulled out people that were in hiding and put them in displaced person camps or homes. So next. That's the first home that I went to. Home de là-bas. The left half of the building was all Jewish children. The right half of the building were all American soldiers, truck drivers supplying the American troops. But take a look at the round tower at the right side of the picture. Next. There is the round tower with the gray stripes. And here I am. That's what it looked like after we were liberated. So once the war was over, and by the way, I was 12 and a half years old. Once the war was over in Europe in May 1945, the American troops left, and then shortly after that, more Jewish children started arriving, but they were all orphans coming from concentration camps. And that is how we started to learn about the horrors of the Holocaust. So basically, it was by word of mouth, people telling other people. And when the building filled up, we had approximately 300 kids there, and we had major problems. Some of us were physically sick, some of us were mentally sick, some of us were emotionally sick. They realized we needed more private attention, so they took me and 49 other children, there were 50 altogether, and put us in another home called the Home de Provençal, where a Dr. and Mrs. Chaffee lovingly brought us back to childhood. It was a great period, except for me, it was a terrible period, because while I was there, I found out that my father was not coming back, that my father had died in a concentration camp called Auschwitz. And that was a big blow to me personally, because I was very attached to my father. So next picture. This is a picture of my Uncle Murray. He's my father's younger brother. He lived in the United States before the war. When the war broke out, He joined the service. He fought in the European theater. And when the war was over, he started looking for us, and he found my mother like in 1946, so to speak. Yeah, 1946. At that particular time, by the way, my mother had already gotten an artificial leg. Okay, but she couldn't take care of us, so we still stayed in the children's home. But she had made arrangements with him that when he got back to the States, that he would gather our family, which basically lived in the New York metropolitan area, get them to sponsor us, and send us the shipping papers, which they did. Next picture. That's the shipping papers. Shows that we left Antwerp, Belgium on April 7th, 1948, and we arrived in New York Harbor 10 days later on April 17th, 1948. And that's how we got here. So in conclusion, I'd like to say the following, that my mother, my sister, and I, who were very lucky, we survived. But we did not speak about it. We did tell our family, but we did not speak publicly. And the only reason I'm speaking to you publicly is because of a movie maker by the name of Steven Spielberg. He created the Shoah Foundation. And incidentally, last week I found out that so far they've video recorded close to 100,000 Holocaust survivors. And it's the young lady that came to my house that urged me to speak. And so I started speaking, and I'm very happy that I'm speaking because it's a story that must be told. The Holocaust must never be forgotten, and it must never, never happen again. So therefore, we must act against evil and prejudice, anti-Semitism, intolerance, and hatred. I'm asking all of you, please do not hate. Hate has no good consequences. And hate eventually winds up in violence and genocide. And also, I'd like to just remind you, nobody is born hating. You have to be taught how to hate. You have to learn how to hate. So the lesson, the universal lesson here is you should be decent to all people, all faiths, all colors, all backgrounds. And what I'm asking you is to become righteous human beings that refuse to be indifferent when you see something wrong. When you see something wrong, say something or do something, but don't turn your back and walk away silently. And lastly, it's also important that we counter the revisionists. Those are the people that say that the Holocaust never happened. Well, I'm telling you, it did happen. I was there, I survived it, and I am a living witness to it. And thank you very much, everybody. And now I'm ready to answer any question that you have.
Question. You mentioned when you were in the orphanage that the Germans raided the orphanage and captured you and the other Jewish children in the orphanage. How did they identify you as Jewish? Can you hear me?
Could you hear that, Danny?
No, I could not. Please repeat.
How they identify you as being Jewish?
How did they identify you as Jewish when they captured you in the orphanage?
Danny, he's asking, how did they identify you as Jewish when they captured you in the orphanage?
Tell them about the pants situation.
It was very, very easy for them to identify us. what happened was when the Nazis came into the orphanage, since it was a boys' orphanage, they made us all undress naked. And only the Jewish boys were circumcised. That's how they identified us. By the way, I'd like to say this, that a thing like that cannot happen today anymore, because many, many non-Jewish boys get circumcised at birth for medical reasons. But in Europe, in those days, only Jewish boys were circumcised, and they were circumcised, of course, for religious reasons. So that's how I got caught, and that's how the other 5 Jewish boys got caught.
And not only that, but also too, because of that, most males were there. More females were saved than males because they could tell if they found a male walking the streets or whatever else, and even though he did not have a star on him, they may put his pants down and they could tell that he was circumcised. And then they knew that he was Jewish.
What was the story of his sister? How did she survive?
Danny, can you talk about your sister and how she survived?
Yes. Remember, my sister was a tot. I mean, she went into hiding when she was only a little over a couple of years old. The people that took care of her were wonderful, wonderful people. And they loved her very, very much. But when my mother wanted to have us back, when she was getting better, you know, to be very frank with you, my sister at that time did not know me nor my mother. Because remember, she'd been hiding for a few years, and all she knew was that family. And that family, I mean, treated her so well. She had no idea at that time that there was a war going on. They were very, very good to her. But when my mother wanted to have my sister back, one way that I was able to convince, you know, my sister that we were family, believe it or not, was that picture that you saw at the very beginning, you know, that was taken of us in 1942. She looked pretty much the same. And I said to her, you know, this is you and that's me. We're brothers and sisters. And that's our mother. So she had a very hard time adjusting to that. And another thing that helped was that at that particular time, like I said, my mother could not take care of her. So we were put in another children's home where there were other children that were in very similar circumstances as my sister, about the same age. And they were actually able to help each other, you know, make the transition, you know, to recognizing and being part, you know, of the real family. And so my sister has no memory of the war at all. And therefore, I just want to let you know, my sister does not speak about the war. But I am 90, and my sister is 82, and I live in Hatboro. And my sister just recently moved to a retirement community here in Hatboro. And so we are in constant touch. We don't see each other that often, unfortunately, because of COVID, but we talk to each other all the time. And she's fine. On the other hand, I just want to let you know also that my mother lived to be 88 years old. And she never remarried.
Yes, Rich.
Before 1939 in Belgium, was there bias against the Jews in Belgium?
Could
Uh,
you?
yes. As far as I am concerned, there's always been anti-Semitism all over the world throughout the ages. So there's some anti-Semitism that did exist in Belgium, but nothing, and I mean nothing, like what was going on in Germany. And I will say something else to you. We were very, very fortunate. Kortekiewicz-straat, believe it or not, was a street that was approximately 50% Jewish and 50% non-Jewish. So we had many, many, many wonderful and very good non-Jewish neighbors. And as far as I know, there was never an anti-Semitic incident that occurred on our street. We all got along very well. Because I remember as a little kid, coming home from school, doing my homework, and the next thing that I did is I ran out into the street and we played in the street. Remember, all the houses were attached, so we played soccer, by the way. That was the game that's big in Europe. We played soccer. It didn't matter, whether you were Jewish or not, we played together. It's only after the restrictions went into effect that I was not able to go out anymore.
Time for one more question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just curious about his life once he got to the United States and how he acclimated.
Sure. Danny, the question was about you acclimating to life in the United States.
Oh, in the beginning, it was kind of difficult. The reason was that when we came here to the United States, I didn't speak any English. And what also happened was, which my mother was very unhappy about, was that we went to live in the Bronx, New York, and my mother went to live with one aunt and uncle. I went to live with another aunt and uncle, and my sister went to live with another aunt and uncle. So here, we're still separated, we're not a family yet. And so when I went to live with my aunt and uncle, at that time I was 16, a little over 16 years old. They sent me, I had brought my records from Europe, and they sent me to high school. James Monroe High School in the Bronx. And I sat there, remember, we came here April and May and beginning of June, and I didn't understand. I was having a hard time. The teacher said to me, she says, if I were you, I'd learn how to speak English over the summer vacation. She says, then when you come back, I'll have to keep you back a year, but we can pick it up from there. I was very fortunate. I had a cousin that lived with me, who was only a couple of years older, and that's what he did. He taught me English during the summer. And not perfect, but enough to get by. And once, I learned how to speak English, I had no problem, going to school. But I told you my mother wanted us to be together, so she contacted an organization called the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, HIAS. And they took us and put us up in a hotel in New York City until they were able to find us an apartment in Brooklyn. And that's how we finally got together. And that's where I started making my boyhood friends, which were, by the way, all American born. So that was great for me because right after we got to Brooklyn, I really learned English very well and very quickly. And also we applied immediately, for American citizenship. I couldn't wait to become an American citizen and live the American life. And that's what I've done. I have no problem adjusting to our life here. And I did have, the American dream. I got married, I went to school, I got a job, I had children, I had a house. I had all the things, that made this, a great country. And I had absolutely no trouble adjusting. Also, I would like to say to you, because I was asked this question recently, do I have any problems, with the past? And the answer to that is really no, because I live in the present, meaning I talk about the past. It should never be forgotten. But once I finish my talk, like today, I go on with my regular life. And I don't have any bad dreams. I don't have any complications. I lead a normal life.
Well, Danny, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. Alan, I want to thank you for organizing this series. And Peter here has done a wonderful job in bringing this to DPC as well. So I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you so much.
All
Thank
very,
you.
very welcome. It was my
Thank
pleasure.
you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. And thank you, Alan, for your help.
Thank you, Danny. Christian, this has been recorded, correct?
It is recording right now. So hopefully tomorrow I will be able to upload it and make sure that it's all set. And I will share it as we go.
It'll be on the website.
Yes, and I'll share it on social media and we'll make sure people can see it.
And if
Thank
there are
you.
additional questions, feel free to please get back to me, and then we'll try to respond to every one of them.
Right. We have information here about the post that Alan, are you a member of that post too, Danny?
He was not in the military, so he can't.
Oh, okay.
No.
So, yeah, we have information back.
But he's part of it, yes.
Just help yourselves. Okay, thank you.
Alan, I'll be in touch tomorrow. Thank you both.
Great. Thank you all.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Have a
Bye-bye.
safe day.
Have a great day. Thank you. A dry
Bye-bye.
day. Bye-bye.